Nowhere to Hide. One of the toughest things the legislature has to deal with when it's in session are the budget issues. And when it comes to budget issues, there are a few things that are more expensive and more fraught with danger if you try to adjust it downward than the Medicaid budget. We'll have some thoughts on this and a few things you need to know about some of the work being done behind the scenes on the Medicaid budget coming up next.
Bias, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde, and I'm not here to tell you what to think, but I'm here to encourage you to really question things that you are hearing through mainstream media sources. And one of the places where you will see a lot of, how can I put this, advocacy, I'm trying to be diplomatic, is when the media starts to report on issues involving Medicaid or Medicare or any kind of entitlement program, anything that would result in less money being extracted from the taxpayers or more people being self-sufficient and not dependent on government is seen as just a terrible affront to humanity. And it's a very tough thing for legislators to have to deal with. And of course, there's a lot of federal money that comes with it too. So they're kind of catching pressure from both sides. But there are a few things that I wanted to share with you, courtesy of the Idaho Freedom Foundation and some of the wonderful minds who work there, including Nicholas Kleinworth, including Fred Birnbaum, also Parrish Miller and Ron Nate as well. Every one of them had some really good insights to offer on this. So I'm just going to give you some quick down and dirty insights into the Medicaid budget and some of the challenges that legislators face when it comes to trying to meet the needs without actually growing the budget incredibly, which is actually what's happened over the last few years. So first we read, one of the biggest issues with the Medicaid bureaucracy is the administrators view enrollees as customers. In other words, they're designing the system to draw in more people, right? More people is better. Well, that depends. Those people are putting money into the system? No, they're taking money from the system. So for businesses, more customers mean revenue to sustain operations, more profits to reward good employees, more success to build on. But government is different. More enrollees do not correlate with more revenue, but they do mean more costs for everyone who's in the system and less liberty, or more costs for those who aren't in the system, rather, and less liberty for everyone who is in the system. Now, here's another takeaway. The Medicaid Managed Care Task Force released its final report this was back in December, or back in November, actually, detailing how it planned to curb Idaho's oversized spending on medical welfare. But it didn't offer any solutions. And this should tell you a little something about why does the old guard fight so hard to keep things the way they are? Well, because this facilitates, a flow of dollars between, the taxpayers and their government and the federal government and the state of Idaho. It's in their interest to keep people dependent and to stay in the good graces of those federal welfare administrators. Now, the task force was originally established to examine solutions that would, among other things, reduce costs, provide transparency, achieve budget predictability, and improve healthcare outcomes. Now, those are all laudable goals. The primary goal was whether Idaho should switch from a blend of funding models, including a fee-for-service or maybe value-based pricing and managed care, to a comprehensive managed care model. Now, it seems the task force was never truly intended to reduce the costs of Idaho's medical welfare program. So the choice between staying the course and transitioning to managed care was actually two paths to the same end: more government, less independence, higher costs. And so this particular piece points out, if you want to see real change occur in how those Medicaid budgets are approached, it's time for the legislator to stop procrastinating by studying Medicaid and surveying contracts. Lawmakers have to act to promote personal agency and shrink the welfare state. That's the only path to truly reduce costs and improve the health of Idahoans. Now, again, why would we want to shrink the welfare state? Well, because the welfare state, I don't know how to put this to you nicely, so I'm just going to be very blunt. The welfare state does not create money from thin air. It doesn't create value from thin air with the various programs that it administers. Every dollar that is handed out as a benefit or an entitlement to someone came because someone along the way provided the value that was then taxed away from the taxpayer and converted into, the favor that's now being bestowed. Some people need help. It's true. And I think we have a responsibility to look after those who are truly needy. But this sounds very different. This is like building a constituency of dependency. And in fact, we've seen this is actually the case sometimes for generations. That can't be a good thing. All right. Here's some breaking news you don't get from the legacy media. Conservatives in the Idaho legislature were correct, by the way, when when they had the task force to kind of reconcile the Medicaid budgets last session. They were correct to reject both of them. Why? Because the Medicaid department is sending back or reverting $278 million to the general fund. Now, what that means is the budget was over appropriated. They not only appropriated money, they gave way more than they needed. To put that error in perspective, consider that the budgeting error, $278 million, is nearly 3 times the total budget for the Idaho State Police. Now, of course, they got it right back to the taxpayers, right? No, they didn't. They actually kept this money for a year instead of returning it to the taxpayers. And it brings us to another interesting concept of these stabilization funds, which we'll talk about here in a few moments. But your money is your money. You earned it. And yet when it somehow passes into government's hands through the miracle of taxation, there's no hurry to get it back to you. In fact, we better hang on to it in case we need it for a rainy day. So again, here's one of the takeaways. And again, this comes from the combined efforts of great analysts and writers like Nicholas Kleinworth and also Fred Birnbaum and Parrish Miller. Medicaid is Idaho's largest single government program. In fact, it has the largest budget of any program. At nearly $4.7 billion for fiscal year 2024. This was actually published, I believe, actually it was in January of this year. I've got that date wrong. It represents 34% of the entire state budget for all programs. That includes federal funds. So you would think that there would be more scrutiny on this budget. But the history is that apart from a couple of close votes, including in the 2021 session when Senate Bill 1185 to fund Medicaid at $3.7 billion, it hasn't. Nobody really wants to pay that close of attention. The Medicaid bill passed the House by a margin of only 36 to 34 on the fiscal year 22 budget. But that budget has now nearly grown by $1 billion in 2 years. I know, $1 billion here, $1 billion there. The federal government, they're racking up $1 trillion every 100 days. It doesn't seem like that much, but to a state, especially a state like Idaho, which does not have a huge population and tax base, yeah, it's a lot. So there have been some things put forth. This is one of them, and this is a commentary that Parrish Miller had written up, or actually analysis he'd written up of House Bill 685, which would create what's called a Medicaid Budget Stabilization Fund. Transfer $12 million from the Cooperative Welfare Fund to the Idaho Millennium Income Fund in fiscal year 25, and transfer any unobligated general fund monies remaining in the Corporate Welfare Fund to the Medicaid Budget Stabilization Fund. Now, again, this is a rainy day fund, which on the one hand sounds pretty good, but why would government need that? I mean, well, if the economy gets bad, how are we gonna keep it operating? Okay, but what about the taxpayers? Do you think they don't feel the economy slowing down? If anything, those funds need to go back to them and not be sitting in government's account just waiting for an excuse to be spent. Somebody will find an excuse to spend it. Now, this analysis also says it should be noted that Idaho's various budget stabilization funds are projected to have a year-end balance of more than $1.2 billion, including more than $800 million in the primary stabilization fund. That is an excessive reserve balance. Most of this money should be dedicated to tax relief, not hoarded for future increases in government spending. Should a future economic downturn result in reduced revenue for the state, the appropriate solution would be belt tightening and reform, especially for Medicaid, not relying on excessive cash reserves to forestall spending cuts. Now, Medicaid is one of the largest, most expensive government programs, always growing in scope, size, spending, while increasing the people's dependence on government and forcing private providers out of the market. Medicaid expansion has been particularly harmful because it expanded this program of dependency to able-bodied adults. House Bill 419 would amend Section 56-267 Idaho Code to condition the continuation of Medicaid expansion on a number of cost-saving measures and reform benchmarks. So here's somebody actually paying attention and trying to reduce those costs and increase the transparency. Now, here's another takeaway. Healthcare should be provided and obtained rather in the private sector. It should not be a government-sponsored function. Anytime individuals are enabled or encouraged to seek healthcare or healthcare subsidies through government, the private market for healthcare is weakened and people's dependence on government is increased. By reducing the number of individuals who are dependent on a government program, House Bill 419 would decrease public sector competition with the private sector. Now, some of the things that would be undertaken to instill some of the various reforms that would include looking at ways to cut would be requiring the federal match rate to remain at 90%, requiring the Health and Welfare Department to implement work requirements, again, for able-bodied adults. Numerous exemptions would still exist, unfortunately, putting an enrollment cap on able-bodied adults enrolled in Medicaid expansion, and the suspending automatic eligibility renewal. The department will also be required to maintain a Medicaid improper payment rate of 5% or less. So no more accumulating these huge funds. That requirement alone would save Idaho taxpayers $136 million if successfully achieved. And the bill would also require no Medicaid expansion funds be used to fulfill any gender reassignment procedures, including treatments and surgery for Idahoans. Now, you do understand, it's not telling you can't get that. It's just saying, if you're going to do that, that's going to be on your dime, not on the taxpayer's dime. So I share this with you to give you a little bit of insight into some of the things going on behind the scenes, some of the takeaways from the Medicaid budget, which is hugely expensive. When it comes to allocating those funds, there's a lot of pressure on state legislators. Maybe you understand a little bit better why. But don't mistake fiscal responsibility for cold-hearted politics and just, throwing the needy to the wolves. That's not the case. This is a matter of people need to be dialed in, because otherwise people get enrolled into the system and the system is like, and now you are ours for life. We will hug you forever and ever and keep showering you with benefits. Maybe they don't need them. Maybe they didn't need them in the first place. I know that's not a popular thing to suggest, but still, somebody needs to speak the truth. Hey, speaking of speaking the truth, I just wanted to make sure that you saw this. Dr. Ryan Cole will be appearing at Capitol Clarity, March 21st, 12 noon. You can go to capitalclarity.com if you want to watch it online. You can go to the Idaho Capitol and see him speak in person. This is one I would really love to come and see in person, if for no other reason. He was targeted so heavily by the legacy media here in Idaho and falsely smeared. And of course, the state of Washington, well, we took away his ability to practice medicine, but he was right. The concerns he was bringing up were right. They weren't on the narrative. They weren't part of the official narrative, but that's what makes it, to me, all the more courageous. The guy spoke up and he said the truth when it was dangerous to do so, and he's paid a high price. You should hear it from him, though. You don't have to, I'm not telling you should believe every word he said. I'm just saying, if you want to hear it from the source, you've got that opportunity. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Bias, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.